Third time's a charm. Okay, well, tonight we're going to talk about sourcing and everything I can come up with, different ways of doing it, the different parts of it, and all the little tricks and things like that that we have in the sourcing system in FamilySearch. And so this is a page that shows sources from my great-grandfather or my grandfather. And the main thing that we have to remember is that sources are the way we verify the validity of people. And that people in FamilySearch trees, that the tree that don't have sources are people we need to really be careful with and around and using, because there's no way to verify that they're really people if they don't have any sources attached to them. So when we have sources attached and the sources are verified that they go to this person, we know that we've got a well-researched person that we can go with.
Mary Eberline.
Okay, what I did is I made a list of a lot of the terms that are used in sourcing. And I won't necessarily want to go over every one of them. You have to realize that the source is really the end result of taking a historical record of some kind and attaching it to a person so that it's linked to a person, and we now know that that information pertains to person A or whatever. The source box is where you can store your sources. Source tracker is the tool that we'll talk about all the way through the lesson today. Attaching and detaching. Attaching a source means that you connect the source to the person in a tree. Detaching does not mean that you delete the source. Detach does not mean delete. Detach means to just unattach a source to a person. That source still exists. It's just no longer attached to the person that it was connected to in the first place. Editing, you can edit sources. You can also edit the records, the historical records, at least parts of the historical records that go in a source. Tagging is the ability to take the facts about a person and tell FamilySearch that they are in this source and go to either the name, sex, birth, christening, death, or burial of the person. There's one glaring missing term in this tagging system, and that's marriage, and we'll talk about marriage records in detail. Unfinished attachments are attachments that are sources that have been partially attached to people. Some of the people in the source are attached and some aren't. And so the system now tells us the records that are only partially attached, which is nice. We'll talk about adding a new source and different ways to do that. Adding a memory from a source. I'll show you a somewhat complete process on that. I tried something at the last minute tonight and really ran into some fun. And then attaching a source from the source box where it might already be. So these are all terms that'll be used tonight. So I thought we'd put them at the beginning of the presentation. Okay, the source box. This is the place where you can store the sources you have created. They're your sources, not other people's. You do not have to store the sources in here. It's up to you, but there is a place where you can store your sources. It has several different parts. There's a home section, and there's an all box where you can see either all the ones. Home is that the sources that are unsorted, They're the newest ones you put in there. All supposedly has all your sources that you've ever made. And the home one is missing those that you have put in folders that you have created. So I've moved some out of home into different folders, and you're allowed, I think, up to 50 or something like that, different folders. And the little numbers tell you how many sources are in that folder. And you can also choose to select to remove, either select things for different reasons or to remove sources from the source box. Okay, a little more on the source box. While in the source box, you can manually create a source. That's by clicking on Create Source. And I'll do at least one of those towards the end of the presentation. And then you can leave that in the source box, and you can then later link it to a person. And then also you can click on as many sources as you want. I only show one source here, but you can click on as many as you want, and then you're able to move them somewhere or remove them, which means take them out of your source box. And again, just like detaching, removing a source from your source box does not delete the source. It just means it's not in your source box anymore. Okay, attaching the source from the source box. If you already have a source in the source box and you want to attach it to a person, go to the person's source page. So I've gone over here to John Ewing, and I'm going to click on Add Source, and then I'm going to say Attach from the source box, because I've got a source over there that I want to attach to the source box. And when I click on Attach to the source box, my source box list shows up. And I decide which one I want to attach, and it's this very first one, Elizabeth Ewing in the household of John Ewing, 1850 federal census, and I click Attach. And when I do that, it's going to ask me to give a reason. So I'm going to fill in a reason that this is the source, this is the census for the John and Elizabeth Ewing household in 1850, showing their children that we know, so we know this is the right family. And then you click Attach, and it's now attached to, in this case, John. Okay, tagging facts. I'm trying to get my little menu at the top of the screen to go away so I can read what it says up there. Tagging, okay, tagging the facts in a source. This is one of the things that can kind of get away from us. These tags are kind of done behind the scenes, and a lot of times you're not even aware that they're there. But when you create a source, unless you have unclicked your tagging over here, it will automatically tag for you any facts about the person that is in the source. So in this case, this particular source, it has Robert John's name, birth, and sex. And so it's going to check those for me automatically. If I had unclicked tagging for some reason, those wouldn't be tagged, and I would have to manually do that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, like I said, you can unclick the tagging box if you want, but it's best to be left on. There's also a box to add the source to the source box. And this, like I've said, is optional. You don't have to do it. And I would recommend that you at least put in the source box any sources that you create from scratch, because those sources you definitely want to have access to. The sources that are made just from using a record at FamilySearch or even Ancestry, some of these other places aren't as vital to have around, because you can always go back to the record and figure out what happened to it if it's no longer attached to this person. But if you create a source on your own, you really ought to have that in your source box so that you can get back to it if for some reason it gets detached from the person that it needs to be attached to. And so the tricky thing about the source box here is that if you uncheck it like it is right now, no sources I make will go into the source box. I have to remember, if I have it clicked that I don't want things put in my source box, I need to remember to go back and check it if I then want something put in my source box. It's one of those things you tend to forget about. And then you go looking for a source and you realize you checked it not to put anything in your source box. Then you've got a real problem because they won't be there. Okay, adding a tag. Now, say we find a source doesn't have tags. Well, one way we find out about that is by viewing the detail of the source. So I've got a source here, and I'm going to view the details, and you'll notice that down here after I open up the source, it says tag equals 0. And that means it didn't get tagged. And it was one that I made by myself. I can tell by the little symbol that it's a self-made one, and I need to tag the things that are in it that pertain to William Pillsbury Carter. So to do that, I go up where this tag, where it said tag, and I click on it, and the little box opens up, and I can then click on the things that I want to have tagged. And if you had something that was already tagged and maybe something in it was incorrect, like it tagged death when there really was no death information, you can go to this tag list and unclick things that shouldn't be clicked, or in this case, click things that need to be clicked. So on this particular source, I would click his name, his sex, and his birth, because this is a birth record from the town record. Okay, and again, we can't tag a marriage because it just won't allow us to. Marriages are treated differently in FamilySearch, just like they're treated differently in the temple ordinances. Sealings are treated totally differently than the individual ordinances, and that was what drove the marriages to be treated in a different way than the rest of the information about people and tree. Okay, so what do we do about marriages? So I've got a marriage record here. Marriages have to be handled a little differently. FamilySearch would prefer that you attach the source for a marriage to the marriage fact, which is found underneath this marriage record under family members section of the tree. I personally like to see marriages entered for each of the individuals of the marriage and where the marriage is located that we're going to show you right now. To get to where the marriage fact is located, you have to click on the little edit icon next to where marriage is. This comes up, and down at the bottom is a place where you can add a source. Now, the way FamilySearch would like this done is that you come to the marriage, you open up the marriage, and you add the source at this location. I find that to be hard. It's easier to create the source, save it in your source box, or create the source, attach it to each of the individuals in the family, save it to the source box, and then come over here and grab it out of the source box and attach it to the marriage. And you can do it either way. You could start at this screen and create the source from here, or attach the source from here to begin with, or you could start with the individuals and work the other way around. Often what I do is if I find a marriage attached to an individual, I'll go out down to the marriage record like here, and then go down here and look at sources and see if there's a source here. If not, then I know there's a source that can be added. And then I have to figure out how to get it in here. If I didn't create the source, it's going to be a hassle. I'm going to have to create it again to be able to get it up here. So sources are a little bit tricky. And this isn't the only time it's tricky. It's also tricky when we try to actually use Source Tracker, and we'll talk about that later too. Okay, adding and editing information. Now, this is one of the real frustration points of people. People get real upset because they're used to working over in Ancestry. And in Ancestry, if I have a source, like this has a different year for the birth year, I can just go in there and change it. Because this source says it's 1878, I can make it 1878. FamilySearch doesn't work that way. Their philosophy is having a lot of records won't necessarily make it to where you know exactly what the right one record is. And having one record is dangerous to rely on because you don't know for sure if it's accurate or not. And rather than having people changing stuff constantly because they find a new record and it has something different, like say birth records off of a census especially, where every census can have a different year calculation, they would prefer that you manually go back and change the record. And so that's what's going to happen here. If there's already something in this case, birth and also in death, I'm going to have to go, after I'm through sourcing, go into the person's birth record and death record and make changes that I think need to be done. If it's blank, such as down here where burial is, then it will add what's there. It'll create that new field for you if you move it over. That's the one catch. So in this case, I went and checked, and there's one record, this World War I draft registration, that said he was born in 1879, and unfortunately that was the first thing sourced. So that's why it shows 1879. All the other sources on this gentleman say that he died in 1878, not 79. And so I'll have to physically go in and change it. And then again on the death, because it has about 1960, we can't put anything else in there until we go to the death record, edit it, and then we can add the exact date. Okay, multiple sources. That's another question that comes up. This is obviously a situation of 4 different records of a marriage. I know it's a marriage because of the year, or take that back, birth. Because of the birth, John Barney was born in 1730. In this case, there's actually 2 of them that have the little world symbols. Those came from Ancestry, and 2 sources that came from FamilySearch. But they're all the same record. This record was posted at Ancestry. It was also posted at FamilySearch, and the town record was posted 2 different ways. So there's 2 different collections. So what in the heck are we supposed to do about this? Do we get rid of 3 of the 4 of these records? Or do we leave all 4? Well, FamilySearch says leave them, because they're working on a system that they will eventually be able to create a overarching source that will encompass all 4 of those. It'll be the birth record, and it'll show the various copies of that source that were merged into one record. And so leave it that way, because especially the FamilySearch ones, if we undid the source on one of those FamilySearch records, that means a record would be floating around in tree that someone could come along and create a new John Barney. And if they're not paying attention to the prompts and things, start temple work for him. And that's what we don't want to have happen. We want to eliminate all the ways for duplicates to be made. And one way is to capture all the sources for a person, even if there's multiple ones of the same exact thing, and just put them in there. So for now, it makes it look messy, but just live with it and just realize that you're helping the system by leaving them attached to the person. Okay, arranging people in a source. That's the next thing that's fun. Source Tracker, this tool that we use, tries every way it can to help us. Now, it's organized in a certain way that's not always real evident to people when they first start using it. There is a primary person. In this case, it's Muriel Reese. And that primary person is the person found on the left-hand side, directly below the little blue bar. And that bar tells you that the person directly below it is the primary person in this record. In other words, Muriel Reese is the person in this record that the system tries to connect everybody into the family based on her being in the family. So they've got her with her husband, Lowell, and her parents up above. So it's not always easy to see this when you first get in there. There are relationships here, though. Notice the line at the very top says parents. They're the parents of the primary person, if there are any in the record, and if the system can identify them. There will be, if that person has a spouse, they will be in the box directly below them, below that primary person. If there are any children in that record, there will be a line directly below the husband or wife, depending on whoever the spouse is. It says children on the record. And notice it's not open. And there is one because it says children from family tree 1. And it needs to be open. These do not open up automatically all the time. Also, if that main person, Muriel, had siblings named in this record, they would be found down here under siblings. And again, they're not opened. And so I would have to click on it to be able to see them. And so this is the basic way Source Tracker is organized. Now the game is we got to get the people where we want them so that we can source what we need to source. Now, the one thing I didn't mention, the people that are in green are done. They have been sourced on this record. So Muriel and Lowell and Muriel's parents, Edward Reese and Emma Hart, are all sourced. But there's still 2 people down at the bottom, Charles Gray and Nellie McMaster. They're the parents of the groom, Lowell Gray. They need to be sourced. So we're going to have to play with the source so that we can get them up at the top of the source tracker so that we can actually source them. And there's a way to do that. We need to move Lowell up into the position where Muriel is found right now. And to do that, we click on the change that's on the left-hand side, or it's kind of in the middle, but it's really the left-hand side of the screen. Click on that change and change from Muriel to Lowell. And that will slide him up where Muriel goes. And if the system understands what's going on, it should move Muriel down to the spouse, and it should move Lowell's parents up to the parent position. And so when we got done, that's exactly what happened. I did that one little change by clicking change here, clicking on Lowell's name. It moved him up here, moved Muriel down here, and moved his parents up here where they can now be sourced. It's nice when it works that way. It doesn't always. Sometimes we have to play around with it a little bit. And if there was a problem, we would go over here to change. Like I will see one, I think, somewhere else where when I changed the person here, this person changed over here, but the other person stayed there and didn't change. And in that case, we would have to click change and set from FamilySearch the correct person to match up with the person on the left-hand side. So the right and the left match. Okay, so I would click change and then I would find somebody else. I don't need to do it on this one. But if Muriel had stayed up here where Lowell was, I would have to go down here and click on Lowell and have him put up here physically. And then everything would be lined up right. FamilySearch knows that Source Tracker can do this pretty well most of the time. And then there's some of the time it can't. And so they've tried to build into it ways to work around things when there's a problem. You just have to learn to play with them, not be afraid of it. Okay, and then if worse comes to worse and you really can't find listed here the person from FamilySearch that needs to go here, you can always type in their ID number and it will put them there. You might have to open another window up and go searching. Okay, now adding people from a source. So here's a source, and it's a birth record for a Rosario Iannatello, who's the son of Antonio and Elsa, or Elisa. And Antonio is in the tree, the father's in the tree. So it appears that we'll probably be adding his wife and a child, or we're going to be discovering where his wife and child might be in tree. But our first assumption is that since he's in tree by himself, that the wife and the child need to be added. There's actually several historical records, as you can see here. I've got several records I can add to this gentleman. So to begin with, we're going to click on Review and Attach. That'll get us into Source Tracker. So here we are. We've got Antonio, because he's in tree and he's the main person. We've got him in that primary position. He's right below that blue line. We can see that his wife is directly below him, so it's an add person at this point. And for the child, it knows that Rosario's their child, so it's put him down here where children go with an add button because he doesn't appear to be in tree at this point. So what we need to do is put a reason statement in there. So I'm going to put a reason statement in there that says this record is for the son of Antonio Iannatello and adding his wife and child to the family. The information on Antonio matches what we already know exactly, so this is surely his family. Okay, so that's what we have. You can see we already knew he was born in Italy in 1884, and it gives us the same town of birth and almost the exact same year of birth for this Antonio from the record. So that's why I'm saying this is surely him, because the odds are it is him. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do then is click attach, so it attaches to him. And notice we're tagging events, so it's going to tag his name, his birth, and his sex. This record will be tagged to those records on him. Okay, so we click attach, and then we go down to the wife. Now, when I click on that ad, one of two things will show up. I'll either see some little boxes here that'll say, this person might be the one you're looking for. Is this the person? And you might need to explore that box and decide if that person really is the person that's in this record. Or if the system can't find it, and that doesn't mean that there isn't a duplicate out there somewhere, but in this case, the system couldn't find anything. So it starts setting up a record for Elsa or Lisa. And it has her name. It has the year of birth from the record, the city of birth from the record. The system tried to standardize it for me. It said she's deceased because it was dated 1885 for a birth. Otherwise, I might have to go do some birth work on this. And so if everything looks okay, then after I've done the ad and looked over all this, I'm going to say create a new person. Now, it takes 2 steps to source a person who's new to the system when you're doing a record. So the first step is create the record. Now that the record's created, I can source it. And so it's already got all that information about her. It's got that box that I filled in initially. So when you give a reason statement, it's best to write a reason statement that covers all the people being attached in one way or the other. We also see that she's being tagged. The one thing that's sad is I did not have add to source box. So when this is all done, I do not have it in my source box. So I click attach. And now I'm going down to Rosario, and I did the same thing. I clicked add on him. And then I get this message, well, be careful here in yellow, this person may not be dead. And so I did a little research since he was born in 1924. I figured odds are he's probably dead. And I did some research, and yes, I did find a death in 2007 for him in Social Security Death Index with the exact birth date. And so I went in and added the birth or the death information here so that I could then go ahead and source him and create him, have him in tree available for other people to do. He's not one of my immediate family members. I can't do his work. So I said, create new person, and then I'm able to go source them. When we're done, we now have a fully sourced family on the source tracker. And when you go into tree, we're now starting to see a family being built thanks to that source. And that's why we do these sources, to add new people into tree if possible. Now, one kind of source that can really drive you insane are those wonderful 1850 to 1870 US censuses. We love these censuses starting in 1850 because everybody in the family is mentioned. They're all there, oftentimes with initials in this case, but they're there. There's just one drawback. Until 1880, there's no relationships. So you can't always be assured that that child, William L. or S. Minton, is the child of William and Caroline up here. You can't be assured of that. He's listed in a list of kids that have birth order that appear to be children. It would seem logical, but it doesn't have to necessarily be. So we have to be a little bit careful. Starting in 1880 is a lot nicer because relationships are given, and hopefully they're correct. Okay, so when we go to source this record, Source Tracker hates these because there's no relationship given for the kids. It can't help you. And so you have to do a lot of dragging and dropping of people. So here's our 1860 version of this family. We're going to go attach to tree. And if it had the wrong person, we could change it over to another person. Or if we had to, we might even have to provide a correct ID. But they're sending us to the right guy, William W. Minton. And so if we had to dismiss this because it really was a bad match and had nothing to do with the person showing there, there's that little dismiss match down here that you can click on to dismiss it. Very rarely have ever had to even think about using that. Okay, so here's what happens. Here's our source tracker. You can notice one person's been sourced. William S. Minton, born in 1847, is sourced. And you know that because it's in green. Green means the source has been done. Now, the left-hand side of this are the people in the record. And I had to cut Dad off because otherwise I wouldn't be able to show the rest of the family. So Daddy's up here where the word census is. And he's up there, no question about it. Okay, but nobody else is matched up. All the rest of the family members are down here. And in tree, these are the people that are already in the family. It shows his wife, Lucretia Caroline. And then it shows 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 children. Okay, these people are already all in tree. I want to source this family, and that means I'm going to have to take each of these people one by one and drag them up so that they're opposite the person they go to, or I get in between two lines so I can add an extra person in. We'll show you that in detail. So I can grab Carolina Minton, who's in the position of the wife, and even though Lucretia's her real first name, in the census it went by Carolina. Even though Lucretia was really born in 1829, the census said 1822, but it's really her. That's the fun part of censuses. So I'm going to take this Caroline, which was way down below before, do a left click on her and drag her up here until she's opposite herself. And that box for her turns orange over on the right. When that box turns orange, I let go of her and she will be lined up with Lucretia. Now, if there's a new child, there's a child, Caroline, on this census who was not in tree. So what I do with her is I drag her up and I position her carefully in between two people. And it really doesn't matter if they're in order. I put her where she would go, but I could have gone between any two kids. And as long as I can get this little orange bar to appear, and there'll be nobody over here because this is a new person. As long as I get that little bar to appear, I let go of her and she plops into there as a new child. So after I laboriously drag and drop these people, and if you drop them in the wrong place, you just grab them and move them till you get them where you want them. Eventually, this is what you get. And so at this point, I'm ready to start working. We've got Dad up at the top, as he's the primary person in this record. Make sure you bring over those things that say add. Like in this case, in censuses, the residents. That helps to identify people. We'll know where he lived in 1860. We know where he lived in 1850. These are great things to help identify the person. So make sure you always click add. And then you got to put a reason in there, and you would put in something like, this is the William and Lucretia Minton family from the 1860 census. Most of the children and the husband and the wife agree with the people already in tree, so this is surely their family. Something like that would go in there. Then I would click attach. And then I could go down through each person. If it says compare, I will be adding the information to an already existing person. If it says add, like down here with these two children, whoops, with these two children, SD and Caroline, I'm actually going to be adding some new children and then sourcing them. And when I get done, this is what Source Tracker will look like. Now there's some people that are in white, okay? And the two children that are not showing, Sarah, this is 1860, she would be 21 years old. She's married at that point. The one that's strange is William Thomas. He does not show up on this census. He has a death year, according to FamilySearch, of 1874. And yet he's not in the family. It's possible that he's living over with grandma and grandpa or an aunt and uncle and helping work the farm or something like that, but that's kind of unusual. So we need to do some real research on William to figure out what's going on. And then there's 3 more kids in the family. They're not on this census because they're not born yet. This is the 1860 census and they're born in the 1860s. But this is what the family looks like when we're finished. Okay, one thing that's important with censuses is to try to find families in multiple records if possible. So I went back and tracked this family from the 1850 census, 60 census, and 70. And of course, William and Caroline are in both. It's interesting that Caroline uses Caroline every time for her name. Their ages sometimes vary, sometimes stay pretty steady. In the 1850 census, we find Sarah, and she's never seen again in the family. Anne shows up in the 1850 census as a 10-year-old. She's probably SA, a female who's 18 in 1860, and then disappears. Mary J was 7 in 1850. There's an MJ who's 15 in 1860, and then she's gone. WT was 4 in 1850, becomes WS in 1860, and then disappears from the family. Amanda's found in all 3. It's interesting, she ages 9 years each 10-year period. John is in 1860 and 70. There's an SB, a female who's 4 in 1860, who does not appear in 1870. There's an AB in 1860 who appears to be Alexander on the next one. Caroline's on both of those, and then Nancy and George appear. And there was a 3rd child in FamilySearch who doesn't show up on any census, so must have died, born and died between 1870 and 1880. So it's good to track families like this so that you get a feel for them across time. Now, the marriage record, that's always fun. This is a marriage record where the couple's parents are both listed. So Florence Lundy has parents John R. and Eleanor Kreider, and Harry Legale has parents J.A. and something G. Smith. They married in 1904 in Michigan. So we want to use Source Tracker for this. This is a great example of poor Source Tracker going crazy. Okay, when it pulled it up to begin with, I came at it from the wrong place, and I had the father of the bride as the primary person. And that messes everything up because Florence isn't matched up with her husband and everything's out of place. Doing it this way, you need one of the principals in the record. And in a marriage, the principals are the husband and the wife, the groom and the bride. So we need to go to that change thing up here under the main person and go down and set one of the other, either one of the couple there. So we'll put Florence up there instead. Now we put Florence up there, everything went fine. Florence is across from herself and Florence's parents are up there. We can see that they were all sourced, but the legality side of the family isn't. And so what we have to do is click the change there and change it over to Harry. And when we did it, look what happened. Harry went up here where he belongs. His parents went up here where they belonged, and Florence stayed there. This is one of those cases where poor SourceLinker it's just too much for SourceLinker. But no problem, nothing to fear. I just go over here and I see that Florence and Harry are across from each other. I just go over here where it says change and I choose Harry. And when it's done, Harry's lined up with Harry. Harry's parents are up here. And now I can source everybody. I can do the compare and the source. So I compare them. I put a reason statement in there and I click attach. Now, just a couple of things about records in general. You got to be careful with them. You know, we've seen censuses where people's births were off by 7 years. This is my all-time favorite. This is my great-grandmother. And she went by Jenny Elizabeth, but her real name was Elizabeth Jane. Their death certificate says she died, it was born in 1846. She actually was born in 47. Says that she was 76, so she was actually 70, trying to think which way it would go, 75. Says that her father's Daniel. That's because her daughter, who was the informant, thought that was her father. But he really isn't. He's a brother of her father. So that's not correct. About the only thing they got right on her, they got the day and the month of birth right, and they got the state right. And that's about the only thing on this census or this record that is not death information that is actually accurate. Everything else is wrong. So you got to be a little bit careful there. And so time's running late, so I won't go over this in detail, but you've got to be careful. Names are going to vary on records, so you've got to be real careful. Don't dismiss something just because the name's different. Might be Caroline on one thing, it might be Amanda on the other because her name's Amanda Caroline. The dates will vary from record to record. Don't let that make you dismiss something just because the birth isn't exactly right. Places will change. And relationships should be one of those things that's pretty steady. That's the thing that I always lean on. If the relationships work, we can usually work around the name, date, and place issues. But if the relationships are off, then we've got to really do some more looking for a record. Okay, I did try one other thing. I wanted to show you the problems you can get into. I haven't resolved this. This is my last minute try to do something thing. So I had a picture that I had taken of my birth announcement from the newspaper. And I thought, well, let's make this a source because I have several sources on me. They used to say you can't source yourself, a living person. I have 5 sources on me right now. So I wanted to fix this, so I used a snipping tool. I use a thing called Earphone View, but both Windows machines and Apple machines have a built-in snipping tool. So I rotated it a little bit and I cropped it. I got me a nice image. So I then uploaded this image into Memories so that I could create a memory for it. And there it is. Okay, from that, I figured, okay, I'll go to my source box. I'll create a source and add a memory. And so that's what I did. and I didn't have a lot of detail on it, so I just put what I knew, newspaper from Tucson, Arizona, November 1947. Click save, and then said, okay, I'm going to attach it to me. So I went to me, I went to my sources, I went to add source, and I said, okay, let's attach it. And I get up there, and it's the second one here. There's no attach over here for it. I have yet to figure out why for the memory I can't attach the memory source. I went out because I got frustrated. I went to newspapers.com. I found that announcement. I created the source using the URL from newspapers.com, and it will let me attach that source to me, but not the one I made in memories. So I still don't know what's going on there. But I just thought I'd throw that in there to show you that we all can find times when we do something and there just seems to be no answer for what it is. So let's see, I see 7 on our chat. I don't know if there was anything about the presentation. No, nothing about the presentation, but Michelle Ashby does have her email in there. So questions? Any questions?
I have one question.
Yeah.
What I've done so that you don't have to go